Namaste everyone. I welcome you to this session of Leadership Talk today on 1st August by Padma Shri A.S. Kiran Kumar ji, former chairman of ISRO. I can see few more people joining in, so I will just introduce briefly and then we will hand over the session to Shri Kiran Kumar ji. Friends, my company is Rated Infotech India Private Limited, and we will be completing 20 years on 3rd of August 2020. So it has been a 20 years journey, a long one, and I wish to thank each and everyone who has been a part of this organization, either as a candidate or a client or a vendor. And we have been in this business of recruitment, staffing services, management consulting, and business strategic consulting over the years. And on the occasion of our 20th anniversary, we have also launched a leadership acceleration program, which will basically focus on nurturing leadership skills and triggering the leader in you. We have a series of outdoor programs at high altitudes with military tourism that will help to sharpen your leadership skills. And my colleague Uma Sudhindra heads the division, and end of the session, she will be speaking about all the programs. At this unprecedented times of COVID-19, when disruption is caused in mobility and supply chain, and work from home has become the new norm, rural economy is becoming more prominent than the urban economy, and every business has to reinvent itself. We have at Triangle Global started a series of leadership talks. This series will continue throughout August, and on every Saturday we are conducting one leadership session. We have started on July the 4th with Lieutenant General Dr. B.B. Shekatkar, followed by Lieutenant General Vinod Bhatia, who spoke about bunker to boardroom. Then we had Dr. Prashant Salgaonkar, who is the CHRO of Shapurji Palonji. He spoke about decoding cross-cultural challenges. And then we had AVM Pranay Sinhaji, who spoke about leadership lessons from Lord Krishna. Today we have a very eminent speaker with us, and we are all blessed to have him with us. Padma Shri A.S. Kiran Kumar ji, whom I know personally for a few years now, is a very humble person, extremely down to earth, and his simplicity just amazes me. I thank him for agreeing to speak to us. Thank you, sir. Let me quickly introduce him. Shri A.S. Kiran Kumarji is a Vikram Sarabhai Professor at the Indian Space Research Organization, Bangalore. He is the member of the Space Commission, Government of India, and member Governing Council, Indian Institute of Science, Bangalore. During 2015 to 2018, he has served as Secretary of Department of Space and Chairman, Indian Space Research Organization. Shri Kiran Kumarji was born on October 22nd, 1952 at Hassan in Karnataka. He obtained his physics honors degree from National College, Bangalore, and MSc Physics from Bangalore University, and MTech degree in Physical Engineering from Indian Institute of Science, Bangalore in 1975. He has steered the implementation of the applications-oriented Indian space program, which has facilitated rapid development of the country in many important spheres of Earth observation, communication, navigation, meteorology, and space science, as well as development of indigenous launch vehicles and related technologies. He has contributed to the design and development of more than 50 electro-optical imaging sensors flown on space-borne platforms, starting from Bhaskara payload to the payloads on board the Mars orbited mission. He has played a crucial role in Chandrayaan-1 mission right from conceptualization stage, and has made exemplary contributions to the success of the Mars orbiter mission and reusable launch vehicle technology. Shri Kiran Kumarji has been the chair of the Committee on Earth Observation Satellites. He has made valuable contributions to coordination group of meteorological satellites, expert team on satellite systems, World Meteorological Organization. Shri Kiran Kumar is President of Aeronautical Society of India and Fellow of Indian National Academy of Engineering, National Academy of Sciences, Indian Society of Remote Sensing, and it goes on and on. He has been conferred with honoris causa and DSc by 18 Indian academic institutions. And he has also been honored with the highest civilian honor by the government of France in 2019. So, this is in brief. I think it's a very long profile that we have with us, and I'm really blessed, like I said, to have sir with us. Sir will be speaking for around 35 to 40 minutes, and then we will take in a few moderated questions. I request all the participants to type their questions in short one line into the chat window, and we will then take up a few questions which will be moderated. And over to you, sir. And we have a very uh, eminent guest with us today. Sri AVM Sinha is there with us. Lieutenant General Bhatia is there. Lieutenant General, Major General Kochar, Sri Manoj Jhajeria, noted industrialist. Dr. Abhi Behra, Advocate Kumar Vaidyanathan, um, Dr. Janmay Thakur, Ashwin Bhai Shroff, all of them are there with us today. I may have missed on a few names, but I welcome all of you and also all the others who have joined in. I hope you will have a very interesting session with Shri Kiran Kumarji. Over to you, sir.
Thank you very much for this introduction, and also thank you for this opportunity to share some of the activities what we have done, and also look at the activity whatever you are trying to introduce and bring in leadership, and how today, for example, what we are going through in this world is a phenomenal, unprecedented event of how a disruptive event can change the life of the entire humanity. And today, by virtue of the excellent communication and transport facilities that are available, which also has become the reason for fast spread of this COVID pandemic. But then what this pandemic has done is it's almost like reset our thinking process and try to make each one of us look at our life in general and then retrospect and see how we need to deal with such situations in the future. The planet Earth itself, if you look at, maybe it has got a breather. It has in some ways reduced load of human activities for a certain period. And some of the positive effects of that we are seeing in air pollution or even revival of the water strength, etc. What I intend to do today is I intend to talk to you about our ISRO's Mars mission, and through that talk to you about the kind of leadership activities, the kind of you can say the culture which helped ISRO bring India the advantages of a technological capability of space being utilized for addressing the problems we face on ground. So I'm going to slightly concentrate on the Mars mission, and through that talk to you about the problems and then how problems get dealt with. If you look at the Mars mission itself, it was a very challenging mission. See, while India started the program of using space right from the time in the early 60s when Dr. Vikram Sarabhai, whom we consider as the father of our space program, brought in the capability of using space technology to the country, and he initiated way back in the 60s with the help of his friends across Germany, France, USA, and Russia, and started the activity of rocket. The sounding rockets were brought in, and in the initial years, the events were conducted in Tumba Equatorial Rocket Launching Site. And over a period of last 4 to 5 decades, India has built up its own capability of polar satellite launch vehicles. And one such mission, which is the Mars mission, which actually took place in 2008, has made a huge impact both within the country and globally by showcasing to the world that India can do activities very differently from what others have done. It can do activities within the limited resources that it has access to. And this particular mission of Mars, actually, it brought in many recognitions to the country. It was among the top 25 innovations or inventions of 2014 Times USA, Space Pioneer Award, and also Indira Gandhi Peace Prize. Then we were the fourth nation or the first nation, individual nation, to succeed in putting a satellite into the Mars orbit in its very first attempt. And what this program did was it brought into the country a feeling of we can do things and we can achieve things with limited, even though there are limited resources and limited access to technology, it can be done. So for achieving this, we needed to build a system which had large autonomy. We will talk about it a little more in the coming slides. Then we also needed to know about the orbit of the Mars. While India started doing its work in space, it started putting satellites into different orbits. Initially, we were doing it in low Earth orbit, what we call between 500 to 900 kilometers, and a number of satellites in geostationary orbit. The advantage is from this particular location in space, which is about 36,000 kilometers above the Earth, 1/3 of the globe is continuously visible. And using this, we have built a series of communication and remote sensing satellite, which helps us look at the cloud and cloud motion, and through that predict cyclones, landfall, and cyclone tracking. And that's up to 36,000 kilometers. And beyond that, moon, which is at 3.85 lakh kilometers or 3,85,000 kilometers. And we did our Chandrayaan-1 program for the moon mission. And then Mars, of course, is when it is nearest to Earth, it's about 225 million kilometers. And when it is farthest, it goes up to 400 million kilometers. And Chandrayaan-1 again was an activity which was conducted using our Polar Satellite Launch Vehicle, which today has completed 50 missions, and we have used it for putting our own satellites into orbit. But not only that, we have also used it for putting 300 plus satellites of 30 other countries, and it has become one of the very reliable launch vehicles globally. And this Chandrayaan mission, which was done in 2008, was an excellent example of how India could do international cooperation. And it also provided opportunity to the international community, space community, for putting their payloads in the satellite. And during its period of almost 10 months of operation, what Chandrayaan-1 demonstrated that it also got the credit of discovering the presence of water molecules and for the process of formation of water on moon. It demonstrated, and it showed that though you are a late entrant to the space program, we were able to actually create a flutters in the universe world by discovering water on moon. And this mission gave us a very good, I can say, basis for our mission Mars, where the requirement was one step beyond. Like I said, you need to go up to something like 225 million kilometers or about 22 crore kilometers when it is nearest. Now, what was required for going to Mars is, from Earth, you have to carry a satellite which can travel for a period of about 10 months in space. And during this period, it has to manage itself. And at the end of that 10-month period, it would approach a point in space which is very close to Mars. This diagram, I just tried to show that initially when you launch the satellite from Sriharikota, it was put into an orbit which was something like 20,000 kilometers by 200 kilometers. And by using the energy source on the satellite, progressively the satellite's distance from Earth was increased to start with from 20,000 to 40,000, 1 lakh. Then it was put into what is called as a Mars transfer trajectory. And then it was traveling towards Mars over a period of 10 months. Now, during this 10 months of travel, you can imagine that as the object goes further and further from us, our ability to talk to it depends on the kind of communication system we build, and that communication system itself will be required to work with very feeble signals, and then it should also be able to track the satellite, and it should be able to communicate with it, command it, and this shows a certain kind of an animation where progressively we are increasing the distance of the satellite from Earth to further and further points, and then almost about 7 trajectory corrections were done, and after that the satellite was sent into an orbit where it started approaching Mars, and this travel took almost 10 months. And in this 10 months period, what happens, you can imagine, is that you need to keep track of this object continuously. That means as the object goes farther and farther, you need to know where it is very precisely, and you should be able to give commands to it. And for this, we needed to build special ground systems in Bangalore, what's called as Bailalu, and then using a 100-feet diameter antenna, the communications were done. And you can also imagine that the ability of the satellite, it should have a lot of intelligence in itself, because for quite some time, the satellite will not have any connectivity with the ground. That means during that period, it should be able to find out if there are problems occurring in itself, and if those problems occur, how to correct those problems, how to switch over to redundant units, and then proceed. And then, of course, one of the primary objectives of this was to study Mars itself. This is how the satellite itself looked like. And then the key things on the satellite was its propulsion system. Propulsion system is nothing but a chemical systems which help the satellite acquire higher and higher velocity. Thermal system is the one, because when you are in space, the temperatures on the satellite itself can go from minus 150, minus 200 degree Kelvin to almost, sorry, minus 200 degree centigrade to, on the positive side, it can go up to 150 to 170 degree centigrade. And then power system is the satellite itself should be able to generate power from sun and then store the energy in batteries, and as and when needed, make use of it and operate. Now the orientation of the satellite becomes very important, because unless satellite is looking towards the Earth, we will not be able to do communication with it. And this requires, all this requires onboard autonomy in the satellite. Autonomy means, and this autonomy is also important because during the period, what happens is, you can see in this diagram, when Mars, sun comes in between Earth and Mars, which happens for almost a period of 35 to 40 days, there is no way we can communicate with the satellite. That means the satellite is totally in what is called a blackout period. And during this period, satellite has to do its function by virtue of its own intrinsic capabilities. Similarly, there is a whiteout where the ground antenna is actually flooded by the sunlight. Like in the daytime, we cannot see stars. Those stars are present in the sky. That is because sunlight floods our eyes and we will not be able to see the star. In the same way, the antennas on ground are flooded by sunlight and we will not be able to pick up the signal from the Mars. So this requires the satellite to have autonomy. And then this kind of autonomy, it was for the first time we were building into the satellite, and it requires a large amount of thinking, a priori thinking, to visualize the kind of problems one could encounter. And it called for development of almost something like 22 new software modules and modification of some 42 modules, which we were using otherwise for our other missions. And then propulsion system itself was a system what we had been using for our geostationary satellite launch vehicles. Based on that, we built the configuration. The difference between the geostationary satellite propulsion system and the Mars system was, Mars system, the propulsion unit had to work after a gap of 300 days because that was the time it took the satellite to go from Earth to reach Mars. And after 300 days of hibernation, the unit had to come back to life, and then the engine had to fire and then perform its function. This was the challenge in that. And then for doing that, we had to carry out a lot of simulation tests on ground. Even during the period when the satellite was in orbit, we had to simulate many of the things by conducting those experiments at Mahendragiri, where we have facilities for testing these propulsion systems. And then the satellite itself makes use of sunlight. You are familiar that sunlight on Earth provides something like 1.3 kilowatts per meter square. And at the distance of Mars, this reduces roughly 1/3. And then using that, you have to create the energy for the satellite operation. And that was done using the sunlight. And then the communication system, I pointed out that as the distances increase, it becomes more and more fainter, the signals becomes fainter. So you need large size antennas. And one of the things you can imagine that even if everything is working fine on the Mars satellite, the distance for that distance, even if the angle of the antenna is out by 2 degrees, just 2 degrees in angle, the entire Earth goes out of visibility of the antenna. So it becomes impossible to do any communication. That means it requires very precise pointing to achieve the functionality. And then the distances, this shows at what distances, what kind of communication is possible on the antennas. Then there was another very important aspect. You can imagine at 40 crore or 60 crore kilometers, the Mars is a very small object visible from Earth. And if you want to make sure that the antenna from ground actually points to Mars and is able to communicate, not only should you be able to locate the Mars precisely, but also you should be able to tell with milliradian accuracy. And this is done by looking at celestial objects which are known as pulsars, and then through them some special mechanisms are evolved for carrying out communication with the satellite when it is orbiting. I'll just go through some of slides of the satellite at various stages of its realization, and then various tests that were carried out on this satellite. And this shows you the antenna on the satellite. And then there is a large chamber in which the tests had to be done to simulate the conditions that the satellite encounters during its 10-month-long journey and during years of operation on Mars. And this is also a very unique test facility established at Ahmedabad as well as in Bangalore for testing the satellite in a radio frequency verifications. And this was just prior to closing the satellite in the launch vehicle. And this is the control room where the operations were done. And these are some of the results of the Mars mission. One of the key things, the Mars mission, we had planned that it would operate for a period of 6 months. That is simply because the amount of fuel we could carry on the satellite was limited by the launch vehicle we had and the amount of weight it could carry. We were expecting the satellite would survive for about 6 months, but today, come September, we would have completed 6 years of operation, and even now the satellite is functioning and we are receiving data from the satellite. In fact, I'll show you one of the images taken just a few weeks back from this Mars orbiter mission, and these are some of the results of what we got from the Mars orbiter. And this is the one which we took an image just on the 1st of July of this month, where Phobos is like moon for us. This is one of the moons of Mars, and an image of this was taken using this satellite. Now, in doing all this, what I would like to point out is Dr. Sarabhai, whom we consider as the father of our space program, had a vision. His vision was India should leapfrog into the future through the adoption of appropriate technologies. In fact, what this small slide shows is what is that leapfrogging and how leapfrogging has been adopted by ISRO in all its activity. If you look at here, the person who is doing the high jump, then he needs to prepare himself. He needs to give enough momentum to himself by running over a distance, and then he takes off for a particular point and then achieves the target of going to a particular height. But in the case of a frog, it crouches at one place and then actually concentrates on all its energy and then tries to jump up and then cross the threshold. And the actually simile or the similarity here is India, while it was a fledgling democracy which had got its independence in 1947, and when the first space object was put into orbit by Russians in 1957, we had in Dr. Sarabhai a visionary personality who could think of how this technology of space can be used for the benefit of our country by adopting this technology. And if we have to make use of such technology, we cannot go through the process where others have gone through, and we need to actually adapt quickly and move ahead. In fact, few of the examples which he demonstrated and wherein he convinced the government at that point of time that space technology is the technology which we have to adopt and which we have to use for going ahead. Very first experiment that was done way back in 75 was an experiment which India demonstrated to the world. In fact, at that point, Dr. Sarabhai convinced Americans that they should allow their satellite to be borrowed by us for 1 year, and using something very similar to today's direct to home television. Way back in 75, ISRO built direct to community television sets, and in 2,400 villages, we demonstrated that through broadcasting, it is possible to reach out to the village and the community in India, the vastly separated. And if we were to use the terrestrial technology available at that point of time, not only it would have costed money, but it would also have taken long time. And then we became the first country in the civilian domain to have very high spatial resolution imaging system, then the Mars orbiter mission, and similarly when 104 satellites were put into orbit, in fact the world took a look, turned around and looked at us. In all this, what it shows is that you make use of the technology that is accessible to us and then use it for the societal benefit, whether it is cyclone tracking, and then today super cyclones, when they occur, the loss of lives is limited, and that is because of use of this technology. In fact, another very important thing which in any leadership role one is looking at is dealing with failures. Space technology, as you can imagine, is a very high risk or risk prone event. Launch vehicles, there are thousands of subsystems. Every one of them has to work to perfection. Then only the object which you want to put starting from ground reaches its destination in space. And in the launch vehicle, any one small error can result in failure. So the failures are necessary steps which you have to go through. But then how you deal with that failures and what kind of mechanism we evolve in the organization results in whether you succeed or you continue to grow further with effective leadership. In fact, this is one of the examples where Professor Satish Dhawan, who was one of the early chairmen of our organization, how he dealt with a particular failure. You will find this example in Dr. Kalam's book, Wings of Fire, where he has narrated the whole event. When the first launch vehicle, SLV, for which Kalam was the director, project director, it failed. On that day, the press which had been invited had to be faced, and Satish Dhawan told Kalam that I will take I'll go to the press and then take this, you stay back. And he told the press that the responsibility of failure is his and then within a year we'll come back and then launch successfully. And the next year when the event was successful, when Kalam invited Satish Dhawan to address the press, he said, no, you have to go and address the press. Now that is your turn. So basically, shield the project executive from adverse publicity. In success, push them to limelight and focus on problems, not individuals. So the failure, even Kalam says, failure is the first step in learning. And in this manner, this is one of the, you can say, important cultures, how to deal with failures. Another important culture of ISRO as an organization is leaving important technical decision making to subject experts. And this is irrespective of hierarchy, because as you can visualize, the knowledge is not prerogative of any individual. And when you are working with interdisciplinary things, a very different set of skills and knowledge base is required. We have people who work from mechanical engineering to computer science, biologists, zoologists, a host of different disciplines are involved. And in all this, making sure that the subject experts have the right say at right time is an important aspect. Then hierarchy, not priority in technical discussions. Then technical meritocracy supersedes hierarchy. These are some of the aspects which are kept in mind in the organization. Another very important aspect is indigenization of non-accessible technology. That means, see, while today, even when we talk of Atmanirbhar Bharat, what is important is you should be able to perform, you should be able to deliver. What is required is finding solutions to the problems we have in hand. So to start with, the communication, broadcasting was a problem, then meteorology, weather forecasting, impact of, you can say, the cyclones, and then reaching the entire community and people, and using space technology. And since we were starting much later and we were just a fledgling democracy, trying to lift the people from the poverty and then reach a advanced stage, technology is not always accessible to you, but what is accessible you should make use of, and what is not accessible and what could be denied, on that you have to work. And that's how ISRO went on developing various technology. You probably remember the case of cryogenic technology, where while initially we were attempting to get it from Russia, the two superpowers, between them, one of them did not allow the other to make this happen. So this, we took it as a challenge, and today we have 3 versions of the cryogenic engine, which makes use of liquid oxygen and liquid hydrogen. And then we have an indigenous capability of that. And then use of accessible technologies you make use of, and what is not accessible you develop indigenously. And try to concentrate on single source items which could be problematic in future. Then another very important aspect in dealing with leadership activity, particularly when you are looking at disciplines which are very diverse, and when you have to deal with people of very different capabilities, is reviewing the whole project in a very specific manner. And then for achieving targets, you have to set aggressive targets. And while you set aggressive targets, you also realize that many times you may not reach the targets on time. That is understood, but still it's only when you start actually pushing people beyond the limits, beyond their comfort zone, that things can be achieved. In fact, today also you have seen how the COVID situation has enabled people in the country, people who have come together, working as a team and trying to solve the problems. In fact, these are some of the things which are practiced right from the early stages of ISRO's growth, and very effective reviewing of the project. In reviewing the project, what is done is people who are responsible for the projects, they are given the authority to run the project. But at the same time, they have to present the activities, what they are planning, how they intend to do that. They will be subjected to rigorous questioning by people from different disciplines, while at the process of that review, all kinds of questions can be asked. The people who are responsible for conducting the project, they have the final say, because you can imagine we can keep on questioning, we can pose problems which need answers, but then we cannot complete all that activity to the satisfaction of everybody within a limited time. So the people who are running the project have the responsibility of making that decision, as long as they can convince that the solution they are adopting can solve the problems on hand and meet the requirements, they'll be permitted to go ahead. And that's how you can say, achieving targets in reasonable time has been happening. Emphasis on interdisciplinary activity, I don't think we need to overemphasize that today. Today, the knowledge is growing so vast and so much. No one person can, in fact, will be able to deal with problems in what we face today. So it is an interdisciplinary discipline is required. The need for listening to the other person is needed. And one very important aspect as a leader one has to visualize is emotional bonding. That means unless you make the people who are working for a project feel emotionally attached to that particular project, you cannot succeed in achieving results. It's only when a person feels involved and then he gives his best efforts. Otherwise, if he is only doing it for the sake of some restrictions or constraints, the best in him will not come out. So this is an important aspect, how to evoke that emotional bonding, how to work together as a team. And then another important aspect is parallel development and not serial. We talked about what we talked about leapfrogging. That means when you want to achieve a technological capability which others have achieved, spending decades of effort, and if you want to do it in a short period, obviously you have to tackle the problem not sequentially, but you have to work on different aspects parallelly and then bring them together. So this is what ISRO did, whether it is a question of building launch vehicles, that is rockets, or satellites, or instruments which are carried on the satellites, and then even the application activities. All these were done in parallelly. We made use of every opportunity accessible to us. For example, Russians allowed us as a friendship treaty, 2 satellites we will launch for you. Aryabhata, Bhaskara was launched using that. Ariane, which is the European Space Agency a company, when they were developing their new rockets, they said there is a slot available, you can fly a satellite in that. So we made use of that and built a satellite, Apple Ariane passenger payload experiment, and launched. So and then similarly in terms of applications, the host of that, you do parallel development and then try to synergize. Then for a country like ours, right from 60s, if you have to visualize, and also the technology of rocket itself being dual use, you can imagine that you do not get easy access to systems or knowledge. So you have to do many of the developments indigenously, and then being a government organization, your ability to increase the number of people working is also limited. So unless you make industry as a partner and not as a vendor, you would not succeed. And that is where, for example, we were able to actually, you can say, involve today more than about 800 industrial partners are there with ISRO who are working on various programs. So industry as a partner, not as a vendor. This was another important aspect. And over a period of these many decades, that what ISRO has demonstrated is using space technology as a tool, we have enabled addressing problems, whether the problem of fishermen getting prospective fishing zone information so that he is able to go to the ocean and then do his fish catch, or weather related or communication related. In all these areas, ISRO has tried to make use of this technology bring in a different kind of leadership and then address the various problems and find solutions to that. In fact, what the Mars mission showed to the world, just in the recent days, you would have heard of UAE going to Mars. In fact, just after our Mars mission, so much of enthusiasm was there across the globe that countries started looking at Mars mission as their first space venture. United Arab Emirates today has already done a launch of a satellite and they are going to Mars. And see, this is the kind of enthusiasm this particular mission created. And on that day, students across the country were actually doing celebration. And this is how ISRO was able to actually, you can say, bring in the technology of space for various developmental activities. In fact, I can go on, and I'll stop at this point, and I'll be more than happy to address the questions which you may have. I'll try to answer it to the best of my ability. Thank you for this opportunity to communicate to you some of the things that we have been doing at ISRO.
Yeah, thank you, sir. I think this was really a very fantastic experience that you actually showed us. Sir, can you stop sharing your screen so that we can get the bigger screen?
Okay.
Yeah. So thank you so much, sir. I think what we have seen here and what we have always heard is that ISRO is one organization which always keeps unimaginable targets. Like when we think of a company, we always speak about that the targets will be certain amount of revenue or sales or certain other things, but nobody keeps a target like ISRO, like going to the Mars or going to the moon. So this is something which is really unachievable for a common person, and it is unbelievable that we can do such things. So sir, I think what you have told us first-hand information about your experiences and certain important lessons which we have learned from ISRO, like how perfection matters and how to deal with failures being in a high risk sector. Like even a 0.1%, or I can't even define that much also, if there is an error, then the whole mission can become very critically, there can be challenges to the mission. And you also quoted examples about Kalam sir and Dr. Satish Dhawan, and you rightly quoted that we have to focus on problems and not on individuals, and whenever there is a success, then the team should be applauded, and the leader should take on responsibility. It is something which is very similar to what Lieutenant General Bhatia also told us, that responsibility should be taken by the leader. We also understood from you that technical decision making is a matter of subject matter experts, and here the leader should be very clear in identifying SMEs, and also the decision should be taken by the SMEs. And meritocracy supersedes hierarchy. This is very, very important, because many a times we see that this factor is not being followed in many organizations due to whatever reasons, maybe because somebody has preferences, or there is any other reason in the organization because of which meritocracy does not really get the credit. So I think these are very good points which you talked about, and you also talked about setting aggressive targets, emotional bonding, which is very important, and also indigenization. And sir, I think I completely agree with you that in the times of COVID-19, indigenization is something which India has to look out for, and leaders have within India have to look out for solutions, and there has to be leadership coming from the all the ranks in the organization, and not just from the top down approach which we have been following, because that is where innovation will come from, that is where indigenization will come from, and people need to think in that area. So thank you, sir. And I will just start taking up a few questions. Sir, we have been receiving very good reviews from a lot of people. So, sir, first question is from Dr. Deepankar Adhya. He is asking, did you feel any bureaucratic or other political interferences with ISRO activities? And if so, how did you handle it?
Yeah, one of the advantages you can say ISRO, of course, in it's a real life and we are living in real world. So you cannot expect everything very ideal. And then obviously at times you have to deal with bureaucracy, and then you'll have to also have to deal with political systems. And by far you can say the interference of that is very minimal, and in all technical activities and in program setting, etc., the ISRO was allowed to perform in that sense. So in my own experience, if you see, I did not face any real issues from the political angles. And from the bureaucracy, yes, of course, we need to deal with it, whether when it comes to budgeting, setting targets for that. In those cases, with respect to the government, we did have to deal with that. But anyway, it was not a very problematic scenario, and it was okay.
Okay, sir, the second question is from Major General Rajan Kochar. He is asking, how does the ISRO leadership and team cope up with the failure of the launch since years of efforts goes into preparations?
Yeah, in fact, this is one of the very important aspects, and that is where risk aversion or risk dealing with risk should become an integral part of the leadership. Because as I was pointing out, we had almost the PSLV itself, if you take, we have done 50 launches, and we had, except for the first one was a failure, but beyond that, after about almost 40 launches, we had one failure. But it shows that the failure can occur anytime for various reasons. So, but what is important is each time a failure occurs, you actually concentrate on determine the reasons for failure and not attribute it to the individual under whom that event occurred. Because many times this is where the problem comes, that in the process of trying to fix responsibility, many institutions and many agencies try to look for actually fixing responsibility on the individuals rather than addressing what caused that problem and how can we overcome. Obviously, you have to deal with the responsibility, and the individuals also you have to deal with it, but then it is not that much important in solving the problem. The problem solution, particularly in the technology areas what we are dealing with, unless you are able to identify the crucial cause and then rectify that problem for future, you will not succeed. So it's an activity where you have to prioritize your actually approach in such a way that first priority is identifying the cause and then rectifying that, and then deal with the people who caused that problem in an appropriate manner.
Sir, there are many questions, so I'll take one by one. When there are too many players like vendors, etc., like you said that you have more than 800 vendors with ISRO. So in that case, or rather I would say partners, what you said, when you partner with the corporate sector. So how do you maintain the secrecy in such critical missions in that time?
Okay, one thing we need to appreciate as far as secrecy is concerned, see, there is a specific undertaking between the organization and the entity where such requirements exist. In majority of the cases, there won't be such secrecy or the confidentiality in the activities that are done. And in those cases where it is required, there will be specific undertaking between the agency and ISRO where that particular information, confidentiality, etc., will be maintained.
Okay, sir, one more question is, what motivates scientists like you to join ISRO when you are probably not paid like the private sector, or or like NASA or some other competing organizations abroad?
Yeah, in fact, this is one thing which again you can see the thing in ISRO, that when Dr. Sarabhai, for example, initiated the whole process and then started looking at how space technology can be brought to the use of common man in the country, how a developing country like India can actually benefit from one of the most advanced technology. When he brought in, he showed that we could think of solutions very differently from others and then adopt those solutions and demonstrate. And what actually motivates us in the organization is this particular aspect, that you are bringing in the utilization of a very advanced technology for addressing day-to-day problems of the country. See, I'll just give you a set of examples again. For example, when you look at the drilling bore wells in the country in the late 70s and early 80s, etc., using space technology, it was possible to identify a location where a bore well can be drilled. And more than, you can say, 4 lakh bore wells have been drilled using the space technology with a success rate more than 95%. Then if you talk of cyclone, and then today thousands of lives, tens of thousands of lives are saved, and we are able to provide information to the fishermen. A person who does not know reading or writing is making use of the most advanced technology. And right from the 70s and 80s, ISRO has been able to showcase, bring in newer and newer capabilities. So what is the motivating factor is this, that you are able to make the lives of your fellow countrymen better, their living standards being improved. This is one aspect which actually, in a way, you can say, suppresses many other conflicts which comes, whether it is a conflict of the amount of money you earn, recognitions you have, all these things, they all get suppressed when you realize that what you have done has made a difference to your fellow citizen and you are able to contribute to the country.
That is a fantastic thought, sir. I think many youngsters who are watching this will get motivated and with these words. So next question is, how is Chandrayaan-1 mission, how has Chandrayaan-1 mission changed the image of ISRO in the world space community?
Yeah, you can actually visualize, see, for a long time, ISRO, while it was developing its capability in space technology, see, the number of people who were doing space missions of contemporary quality or high, you can say, project worth was very limited. Chandrayaan-1, when it was done, actually we gave opportunity to 6 other countries, and we carried their payloads. And in fact, even America, there were 2 payloads, M-Cube and Moon Mineralogy Mapper and a Minisar. And in fact, it was after this mission that when satellite actually got the credit for discovering the presence of water on the moon. And similarly, when we demonstrated our radar imaging capability, world recognized that ISRO and India is capable of working at high technology. In fact, subsequent to that, we are working with America today on a mission called NISR, NASA ISRO Synthetic Aperture Radar Mission. The cost of that whole program is $1 billion, out of which 0.9 billion is being spent by Americans, and they are building one component of a highly advanced synthetic aperture radar. We are building another component. We are launching that satellite, and the data of this will be available to the global community. That means they started accepting India as a partner when it demonstrated the capability of whether it is radar imaging or missions like Chandrayaan. And people recognize you for your demonstrated capability, not for your spoken capability. That is actually another revealing lesson which we learned over a period of time. It's only when you have the capability that you get recognized for what you have done or what you are doing.
Right. Sir, one important question is regarding the leapfrog technology. Like you talked about leapfrogging that was adopted. So in today's age, if you look at India, then many of the Indian companies are just starting with indigenization, or they are just starting developing, especially the product segment. So what would be your advice to these companies? Because if you look at them vis-a-vis the other organizations which are much ahead and which have been probably conceptualized abroad. So in that case, how do Indian corporates cope up with that? And should leapfrog methodology be adopted in such cases?
Yeah, one other thing is in leapfrogging, what we are talking about is not going through the same phase of development by many, see, when actually a person is trying to bring in a new product, the basic objective should be what is that product going to be used for and how it is going to be beneficial and how it can be done with accessible technology to you is the key thing, making it affordable as well as the realizable within the country's resources. And we need not be too sacrosanct on using technology accessible to us, and making use of that, one can go ahead. But basically my own suggestion is look at the basic problem that you are trying to solve. Don't go on the basis of an existing product and improving it. Look at the fundamentals of what are you trying to do, what problem are you solving, and whether whatever method that has been adopted, any solution which has comes out as a result of a set of thinking process of what is the problem and what is the solution that I'm going to bring for that using the accessible things. Today, when you are looking afresh, you can take advantage of what others have done, study them and learn from their approach, but you can adopt your own different approach. That is what is the leapfrogging, how you can concentrate on the capabilities that you have, systems for which you have access, looking at the problem from fundamentals and then coming out with solution to that.
Okay. Next question is from Dr. SP Achuri. He's asking, how does the new generation get motivated to take up space research?
Yeah, I think the space research motivation comes simply because every one of us, space is something which is actually, you can say, attracting. See, every day when you look at the sky, you see so many stars, so many celestial objects. But today, if you look at space, is the fourth frontier. That means, like for human beings, we had land, ocean, air. He captured all this by bringing in new capabilities of initially by taming animals and then moving on that, and then bringing in various vehicles for moving, then ocean, aircraft. Today, space, you're talking about a space tourism, space travel, space adventure, space habitation, going beyond the planet Earth. Elon Musk, for example, has already succeeded in bringing in a capability in a private industry, which even the government agencies are finding it difficult to match. And that means once private enterprise starts making up its mind that it can contribute, it can go far ahead of others. So today, space is the fourth frontier, and in this frontier, the opportunities are many. And in this but only thing is, it's a very high risk. If you're talking about capturing or exploiting space minerals using mining asteroids, etc., the amount of material that could be beneficial is huge, but then the risks are also very huge. So those who are faint-hearted cannot approach this, though only those with deep pockets and being prepared for multiple failures before seeing success. Even Elon Musk, you can see first 4 or 5 launches were all failures. Probably if the first one he succeeded, had not succeeded, maybe he would have closed this shop and moved on to something else. So it's only those who have the readiness for taking risk and then deep pockets can get into the space venture. But then that is the area in which the humanity is going to move. Over a long period of time, human beings are also going to survive outside planet Earth. So it's a question of number of generations. So anybody who is starting now will be a pioneer.
Right. Sir, Atul Kulkarni has a question, but I think it is much similar to what you said right now. He's asking, how can we exploit the potential of commercialization of Indian space technology?
In fact, that is one of the things which the government is trying to do now. Over the period of last 4 to 5 decades, what ISRO has done is, within the country, India is among the very few countries which have end-to-end capability of building launch vehicles, satellites, applications, etc. So now this capability, though it exists, if you look at space economy, which is supposed to be around $400 billion, the amount of money that we are able to actually get our pie in this our portion of this pie is very small. What the government wants is India should be able to get a reasonable share of this global space economy, and that's how it's trying to make newer, both in terms of in space and then newer policies it is trying to bring in. The effort is to make an enabling environment where the technological skills and capabilities developed in the country can help the country participate in global space economy and be a decent shareholder of that economy.
Right. The next question is from Manoj Hajaria from Coimbatore. He is asking, what are the chances of satellites being used in gathering data on agriculture and cultivated area, and how it can be used in the practical purpose?
Yeah, in fact, today also a large amount of that work happens. In fact, the satellite-based data is used from crop forecasting. That means today about 11 crop types in the country, across the country. What is the yield is determined ahead of actually harvesting using satellite data. And satellite data is also used for even telling the farmers what kind of crop he should grow depending on the soil type, what kind of micronutrients he should put, what kind of fertilizers he should put. There's a host of activity, including, for example, on the insurance, crop insurance, there is a huge amount of activity which is going on both within the country and also some of the companies which are trying to bring in crop insurance access to the farmer, where he gets the benefit of when he faces disastrous situation, whether either because of flooding or because of hailstorms or the cyclone or heavy winds, many of these things also, how to deal with those situations, particularly in terms of crop insurance and otherwise in terms of what type of crops he can grow and what type of manure he should put. There is a huge amount of work already going on using the satellite data.
Right. Sir, we have a question from a student who is studying in grade 6, and he says he has great interest in space. I love reading and hearing as much information related to space. I have registered for Homi Bhabha Bal Vaidyanik examination. Please guide me on what I should do, what all I need to learn to have a career in this field. His name is Vihan Khashid, HDFC School, Pune.
Yeah, definitely. See, whatever interest you have, what you need to look at, start thinking of is observe things around you. As you keep observing both nature, people, everything, whatever you are seeing, be a keen observer, and from that observation, try to analyze with whatever skills you have today. As you keep analyzing, your skills will increase, your ability to comprehend nature around you improves, and through that process, you will be able to address any problem you will face in life. And then right now, don't too much worry about what is happening in space, etc. The key thing today is look for things around you, all natural things, and see how the life is happening around you. And through that process, keep improving your skills.
Okay. Sir, we'll take in 4-5 questions more. What is your experience in creating a culture of passion among team ISRO? What were the challenges you faced? This is from Mr. Raghunandan.
Yeah, in fact, like I pointed out, it's very important that if you have to succeed in any particular project that you are actually taking up, it is very important that you bring the people who are working in that project first aware of the target and aware of their own actually contributions, what they can do, and also try to listen to them on issues which they can actually point out. In fact, this is where the real issue, man management and dealing with people comes in. And the most important aspect here is the ability to listen, that you need to give enough space for the other participant in the program to be heard. Majority of the time, if I am the leader, if I start thinking I know everything that is there to be known, the other person only needs to be told, then it will be an utter failure. So we need to recognize every other person who is there also has a role to play, and he has a contribution to make. And only when you are able to convince him that his version or his contribution is being listened to or at least heard, then you can build the team.
Sir, Mr. Ashwin Shroff from Excel Corp is asking, what is ISRO's role in facing climate change?
Okay, what ISRO has been basically trying to do is acquire information from space, because as you can see, space gives you a very vantage point. You can look at not only what is happening at a specific location on Earth, but Earth as a whole. You can look at the Earth's atmosphere. You can look at this data of Arctic, Antarctic. You can look at corals and the entire ocean, and you, by making use of all this data accessible to people who are doing the studies, who are doing the research work, ISRO is providing. ISRO also has a platform in Bhuvan, and there is an activity called NICES, where all the data collected over past many decades is made available to the research community, who can study what happened in a given region over a period of time. And then based on these detailed studies, they can come up with behavior patterns of the systems and then understand for future. See, today, for example, even if you want to look at pollution and how, for example, what happens at dust storm originated in the Gulf, how it impacts Mumbai and how the dust storm reaches Mumbai, we are able to provide such data using our INSAT, where every 15 minutes data is collected over Indian subcontinent, and then by making observation in different electromagnetic radiation, both during in the wavelength region where you can see, and also in using microwave wavelengths where it can penetrate through clouds and then can see at any portion of the day, we are able to provide inputs to them. So ISRO's primary job is to provide inputs to the people who are working, and it's actually bringing in both communication and remote sensing data to the research community in the country.
Sir, one more question from Mr. Swayamnath. He's asking, will ISRO take any step in the near future to clear the space debris floating in the space?
Yeah, in fact, this is one of the problems that is going to occur, and its problem is going to continuously increase, because as more and more satellites are getting launched, you are hearing already people are talking of constellations of 40,000, 50,000 satellites to provide internet capability. But all these satellites also have an intrinsic mandating, where after their useful life, they should be brought to an orbit where the decay occurs and they will enter the atmosphere and burn out. So this is a problem which has to be continuously addressed. While many of the satellites which were launched earlier may not have those capabilities, but in future, what is going to be done needs to be addressed, because today in terms of launch vehicles, all launch vehicle agencies actually do it mandatorily. The fourth stage actually has mechanisms where the unspent fuel is actually got rid of, and then the four stages actually enter the atmosphere, burn out. And this is a problem on which the United Nations auspicious, the agencies are trying to work together. This is a problem which needs to be tackled. There are no foolproof solutions today, but then as the economics of the activity changes, it will become an essential thing.
Sir, can ISRO's expertise be used for preventing river floods like we are facing in Assam and Bihar?
Okay, here also what can be done provided by ISRO is again information of what has happened in last many years. So based on that, conducting detailed studies on how the actually flooding patterns have occurred, how it has changed courses, how the rivers have changed courses in the past. Using such inputs, efforts can be done. In fact, there are teams which are doing such studies today also.
Okay, sir, thank you so much. I think we have taken many of the questions. Still, there are few questions coming in, but I think those are very technical in nature. So what I will do is I'll share it with you over the mail, and then probably if you get some time, you can reply back on those questions, because we have a lot of more questions coming in.
All right.
And sir, we would just request you to give your closing comments on the current situation and how do you think India can move ahead, and then we can close your session, sir.
Thank you very much. And see, today, what COVID has really shown, like we were saying, it has shown the human beings that we have probably, in the process of development, many times we have followed what the business management or management gurus have been telling. In whatever you do, try to maximize the returns without worrying about its impact on what happens to ecology or nature. What we need to appreciate is, and in fact the examples are our life shows so many examples where one technological advantage which has been over exploited has caused so much of problem, and for correcting that, another problem solution has to be done. So today what the COVID has shown is that we need to worry about how we make changes, how we bring in new capabilities, new tool usage. We need to keep the impact of this on the life on planet Earth itself. And that is where what I would say, what India had taught the world, that this entire planet has to be looked at as one entity, and then we need to work for the survival of this entire the life form on this planet. We need to worry about, when we bring in technological advances, what impact it can have on ecology, and then how to minimize that impact. Definitely we need to improve the standard of life, bring in benefits to the humanity, but at the same time we should not do it at the cost of ecological damage over a period of time is important. And this is where use of renewable energy resources, and then trying to make use of the capabilities that the knowledge and technology brings in a more, you can say, tempered manner, keeping the impacts, also studying about those impacts, and be prepared to take corrective actions for such impacts which we are causing. And today, COVID has really shown the frailty of our own survival on planet Earth, how fragile the human health can be. And so unless we start looking at this entire planet in one integrated manner, that's what India has been preaching so far. So we need to actually get back to our roots and understand the wisdom that has been actually existing here. And if we bring in the new technological capability along with that wisdom, India can show the way to the world how to deal with any problem that the world faces. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. It was really a very, very, very insightful session, and I am really always amazed at the simplicity by which you address, and you have shown so much of patience to take in so many relevant questions. And thank you once again for dedicating your life towards the progress of India. And I'm sure that listening to this conversation, it will really inspire many of the people who are on the call today and who will be watching on Facebook also, and through YouTube and other mediums, to take up programs or missions which will benefit India in the long run. I really thank you for your time, and look ahead to more wonderful interactions with you, sir, in future too. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Okay, friends, just to take the discussion further, next week and the week after that, we will be having 2 sessions where we are focusing on all women panel. So we will be having panels, women representing different sectors, and I will very soon announce the names of the panelists in the coming 2 sessions. That will be on the next Saturday and the Saturday next to that. And on 22nd August, we will be having Mr. Augustus Azaria from IBM. He is heading the HR in the IBM. He's a part of IBM HR, and he is going to talk about skilling in the current scenario, in the post-COVID era especially. So I will finalize the topics and the sessions and the timings. So please join us for the same. And please note that whenever we are arranging the sessions, we are taking care of the timing which the panelists give us. So that's why some sessions are in the morning and some sessions are in the evening. And today we had a session in the afternoon. And at the same time, if you all want to know about our leadership acceleration programs, you can drop in an email to us. We have a lot of exciting programs coming up. So you can send in the mail and we will keep you updated about the same. Thank you all for joining in, and hope to see you soon on next Saturday. Thank you so much.